In 1984, 19-year-old Paula Godfrey was hired as a sales representative for a man who promised to fly her out with a group of women to enroll in a clerical skills course. Little did she know that would be the worst decision she ever made. On the 1st of September, the man picked her up from her home to drive her to the airport, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will centre around a serial killer and also references SA. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member and watch a longer, uncut and ad-free version of this video, which features extra details that were unsuitable for this cut. John Edward Robinson was born in Illinois on the 27th of December 1943. He didn't have a particularly good childhood, as his father was an abusive alcoholic and his mother has been described as strict and disciplinarian. But he did excel as an Eagle Scout, and in 1957 travelled to London to perform in front of Queen Elizabeth. He later enrolled in a private boys' school for aspiring priests, but dropped out after 1 year due to disciplinary issues. In 1961, he attended Cicero Junior College and studied medical X-ray, but he never graduated here either. There are gaps in the timeline of his teenage years when no one knows what he was doing. He would just fade into obscurity, then pop up again a couple of years later. The next record of him is when he got married at the age of 21 to a woman named Nancy Jo Lynch, with whom he would later have a total of 4 children. A couple of years later, John forged his credentials and began working as a radiographer at the medical practice of Dr. Wallace Graham, who had been President Harry Truman's personal doctor. In 1969, he was arrested on embezzlement charges after manipulating checks and deposits valued at $33,000. He was found guilty of stealing by means of deceit and avoided prison, but was placed on probation for 3 years. He then found a job as a manager of a TV rental company where he stole merchandise and was fired, but his employer never reported him to the police. Next, he was hired as a systems analyst at the Mobile Oil Corporation. He worked here for a few months until they discovered he'd stolen 6,200 postage stamps from the company. He was fired, reported to the police, and charged with theft, but that didn't deter him, as within 2 months he had moved back to his home city of Chicago and got another job where he embezzled $5,500 before he was caught and fired. He evaded jail once again thanks to his father, who gave him the money to make restitution, though his luck ran out when he and his wife moved back to Kansas City and he was arrested for violating the terms of his probation. Still, he only spent a few weeks in prison, and when he was released, his probation was extended by 5 years. Despite his repeat offending, probation authorities somehow remained hopeful that he could be rehabilitated, if only they knew that his crimes would only escalate over time. John's next ploy was to convince his retired next-door neighbour to trust him with $30,000 to invest for her. Unsurprisingly, she never saw the money again. He pulled a similar trick a few years later when he stole $25,000 from a friend under the guise of investing the money for him. This was arguably even worse, as his friend was desperate for more money to pay for his dying wife's medical care. By 1981, he had been in prison 4 times, though somehow managed to avoid anything close to the maximum sentence, serving no more than a couple of months each time. In the mid-1980s, his craving for crime could no longer be satiated by stealing and embezzlement, and he decided to move on to murder. His first victim is thought to be Paula Godfrey, the 19-year-old I mentioned in the intro of this video. After John picked her up to take her to the airport for this bogus job opportunity, she was never heard from again. Her parents filed a missing persons report and police questioned John as he was known to be the last person to see her, but he denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. A few days later, Paula's parents received a typewritten letter with her signature at the bottom, insisting she was okay, thanking John for giving her the opportunity to start a career, and stating that she did not want to see her family. At 19, Paula was an adult, and despite the unexpected circumstances surrounding her disappearance, police found no evidence of any wrongdoing, so had no choice but to close the investigation. No trace of Paula has ever been found. In 1984, John came up with a new lucrative method of finding victims. Using the alias John Osborne, he approached the leading public hospital in Kansas City and an organization called Birthright, which counseled unmarried pregnant women and helped them after they gave birth. He claimed to have started an organization himself, Kansas City Outreach, along with several other businessmen that provided housing for young unmarried mothers, as well as job training and babysitting. Drawn in by John's bold claims of affiliation with major corporations such as Xerox and IBM, the Truman Medical Center put him in contact with a 19-year-old woman named Lisa Stasi, who had recently divorced from her husband before giving birth to a daughter, Tiffany. John promised Lisa a job and accommodation in Chicago, requesting only one thing in return, that she sign several sheets of blank paper. Lisa told her family about this exciting opportunity, and despite their skepticism, she decided to go ahead with it. On the 10th of January 1985, John came to pick her and Tiffany up from Kathy, her sister-in-law's house. Kathy was later quoted as saying, "I was afraid of him. I knew deep down that was the last time I would see Lisa." Tragically, she was right. Shortly after, John contacted his brother and sister-in-law who had been trying to adopt a baby for years. John told them he knew of a baby whose mother had taken her own life, and that if they paid him $5,500 for legal fees, he could arrange for them to adopt her. Desperate to be parents, they accepted, paid the fees, and asked no more questions. Little did they know that Lisa's death had not been voluntary at all. Lisa's brother David and sister-in-law Kathy immediately suspected that John had done something to her. The family had received 2 typewritten letters shortly after her disappearance with her signature at the bottom. However, the letters didn't sound like they were written by Lisa, and more concerningly, Lisa didn't even know how to type. David showed up at the offices of John's company demanding to know where Lisa and Tiffany were. Meanwhile, Kathy went to the police to file a missing persons report, but neither of them would get answers anytime soon. Although John had quickly gained the trust of the Truman Medical Center, who had connected him with Lisa, Birthright, the other organization he contacted, were much more wary. A woman named Ann Smith was the first person he spoke to there, and he told her that his organization was supported by a church near his home and a bank where he claimed to be on the board of directors. Ann contacted both, and the church informed her that while John was a member there, they had never heard of his organization, nor did they have any affiliation to any program that assisted unmarried mothers. The bank said John was not on its board. In fact, no one working there had even heard of him before. Naturally, these revelations made Anne extremely suspicious, and she decided to dig further until she got in contact with Stephen Hames, the district supervisor of the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole, who had never heard of John, but after pulling up his file, became concerned about his past criminal record combined with the inconsistencies in the story he'd told Anne. Stephen sent John a letter ordering him to report to his office on the 17th of January 1985. The letter was ignored and John failed to show up, so Stephen sent another, moving the appointment to the following week, and to his surprise, John turned up this time. Stephen questioned him on the suspicious inconsistencies that Anne had told him about, but he had an answer for everything and said Anne must have misunderstood. He had told her he visited the church, but never said it was affiliated with his organisation. He also told Stephen that he had collaborated with the Truman Medical Center to house 2 women who had recently given birth. Stephen contacted the medical center, who told him that these 2 women were doing well. However, they were concerned that another woman they'd connected him with, Lisa Stasi, had seemingly disappeared. Stephen then contacted the police department, who had been investigating Lisa's disappearance. However, they said they were no longer pursuing it because, as with Paula Godfrey's case, they found no evidence of any wrongdoing. They did inform him of Paula's disappearance though, and her known connection with John shortly before, almost as if they too suspected something was amiss, but they'd given up on finding out exactly what. Stephen wasn't about to give up so easily though. He contacted the FBI and informed them of the situation, and shortly after, 2 agents were assigned to begin an inquiry. This led to a number of discoveries, including that John was engaging in BDSM activities with a number of women, and that he was organising a ring of S-workers for customers who also wanted to engage in such activities. Unfortunately though, they found no information to suggest Lisa and Tiffany's whereabouts. Stephen confronted John, who at first told him that Lisa had run away to Colorado with a man named Bill, then later said he'd heard that Lisa was fine. A local woman had told him she'd recently babysat for Lisa. When the FBI agent spoke to this woman, however, it didn't take long for her to break down and admit that John had blackmailed her to lie and tell this story. She owed him money and he had taken nude photos of her to advertise her to his customers. 21-year-old Teresa Williams was another woman who John had encountered and offered a job as a mistress for himself and other men. He promised her a regular wage, as well as rent and expenses, plus illegal drugs. In April 1985, he paid her $1,200 to have contact with a 60-year-old man. She was picked up in a limo, driven to a mansion, and when she arrived, the man took her downstairs to his dungeon, which was full of various BDSM equipment, including a medieval rack which he planned to stretch her on. Understandably, Teresa freaked out and demanded to leave. She was driven home, but she had to return the money she had been paid by John, and he was angry. Things escalated when he found out she had a boyfriend who had been visiting the apartment he provided for her. One Saturday morning, John barged into her apartment and pulled a gun on her, threatening to kill her before essaying her with it. The following month, the 2 FBI agents visited Teresa and questioned her about John. At first, she told them a cover story, but it didn't take long for them to extract the truth, including the details of the assault and the fact that, like Paula and Lisa, John had asked her to sign blank sheets of paper, suggesting that she was about to be his next victim. Shortly after, John turned up at the apartment. The agents searched him, but he didn't have any weapons or other illegal items. Then he said he had to leave. The agents arranged to relocate Teresa, and it sounds like she never had contact with John again after that. Ultimately, the FBI agents were unable to apprehend John for anything at this time, and the investigation fizzled out, but thankfully it wouldn't be long before his luck started to run out. In mid-1987, John hired another woman, 27-year-old Catherine Clampett, who had answered his newspaper ad which promised a great job involving travelling. She was known to have a wild side and would often disappear for a few days, so her family weren't too worried when they didn't hear from her for a week or so. But when another week passed, then another, and another, they began to get worried and reported her missing. Around this time, John had actually been sentenced to between 6 and 19 years in prison after yet another conviction for fraud. Police weren't able to find anything solid to link John to Catherine's disappearance, and so the investigation hit a dead end. During his time in prison, John suffered a number of minor strokes. He made a good impression on all the staff though, who recognised his intelligence and good behaviour. This led to him being released after 6 years rather than the potential 19. While he was recovering from the strokes in prison, he befriended the prison doctor, William Bonner, and his wife Beverly, who worked in the library there and gave John a job with her. A few months after John's release, Beverly divorced William and moved to Kansas City, where she was given a position at John's company. It wasn't long before she too disappeared, after her mother received a series of typewritten letters saying she would be traveling for work. In the late 1990s, John discovered the internet and began cruising BDSM chat rooms looking for submissive women. One of the first women he interacted with was 45-year-old Sheila Faith, who had a 15-year-old wheelchair-bound daughter with spina bifida. John offered to pay her medical bills and employ Sheila at his company. The mother and daughter accepted this seemingly generous offer and moved to Kansas City, but both disappeared almost immediately. John somehow managed to cash Sheila's pension checks for the next 7 years. In 1999, John met 21-year-old Isabella Lewicka in one of the chat rooms he frequented. He offered her a job and entered into a physical relationship with her that involved a 115-item slave contract that gave John control over every aspect of her life, including her bank accounts. John actually proposed to Isabella despite still being married to his wife and mother of his children. He and Isabella went to the county registrar where they paid for a marriage license but never picked it up. Perhaps Isabella was already dead by the time it was processed. She had told her family she got married but didn't tell them her husband's name, and shortly after, she vanished. John told one of his business associates that she had been caught smoking marijuana and had been deported back to Poland. His next victim would be 27-year-old Susette Troutton, who had met John online and accepted his offer to travel together and be his slave. Her mother received a number of typewritten letters signed by Susette, explaining that she was enjoying her time abroad as part of her new job, though strangely, the envelopes all had Kansas City postmarks. When she later questioned John about her daughter's apparent disappearance, he claimed that Susette had stolen money from him, then run away with an acquaintance. Over time, John started to get careless, his confidence seemingly boosted after police had repeatedly failed to link him with any of the disappearances. In 2000, he began talking online to a divorced 34-year-old woman named Jeanne. After a few weeks, they met in person and began a physical relationship. She eventually agreed to move to Kansas and work for one of John's companies, a decision she'd soon come to regret. Jeanne was also interested in BDSM, however she quickly realised that she was out of her depth when John entered her hotel room one day and began beating her and taking photos of her after she told him she didn't want to. Following this incident, she contacted the police in a hysterical state and told them what happened. This must have been traumatic for Jeanne, but an incident like this is what it took for investigators to have probable cause to obtain search warrants for John's property. The following week, a task force searched his home and found 2 large chemical drums containing the bodies of Isabella and Susette. They also searched 2 garages he owned in Missouri and found another 3 containers with Beverly, Sheila, and Sheila's daughter's corpses inside. All 5 women had died due to blunt force trauma. In 2002, in the longest trial in Kansas history, John was convicted on all counts for the murders of Susette, Isabella, and Lisa Stasi, along with multiple other charges, including interfering with the parental custody of Lisa's baby. He received 2 death sentences and another sentence of life imprisonment, as well as other sentences for his other crimes. As for murder charges for the women killed in Missouri, John agreed to a plea deal where he acknowledged there was enough evidence to convict him of murder, though he didn't explicitly take responsibility, leading to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for each of the 5 murders. John is now 81 years old and is still on death row due to a series of appeals that take a long time to process. Lisa's daughter, who was named Heather when she was adopted by John's brother and sister-in-law, is now 40 years old and is still searching for her mother's remains. Bizarrely, in 2010, someone in Lisa's family gave Heather a 42-page letter supposedly from Lisa, claiming that she was alive and well and that John wouldn't harm anyone. Although Lisa's remains have never been found, unfortunately it's highly likely that it was John who wrote the letter and that she is in fact dead. Heather believes this too. I'd actually never heard of this case until recently, but it's widely believed that John was the first serial killer to have used the internet to find victims. He was known to go by the name Slavemaster in the BDSM chat rooms he frequented, though none of the chat logs were ever released to the public. What I found interesting about John is how he was able to outwardly portray himself as a kind, successful family man, and how only a handful of people actually saw the true monster he was. His fraud-related convictions were known about in his local community, but he always found a way to explain it away and pass it off as a misunderstanding or something, and he was generally well liked by his neighbours. He should have been imprisoned way sooner than he was for his relatively lesser crimes, but somehow everyone thought he could be rehabilitated. Even when he was imprisoned for 6 years, he managed to fool pretty much every professional he had contact with into thinking he was a good man who had just made a few mistakes, but was overall beneficial to society. This benign persona is by no means unheard of with serial killers, but I was astounded by how many chances he was given, how many women suddenly disappeared right after coming into contact with him, yet were dismissed and forgotten about, and it took for a woman to report being assaulted by him for his property to be searched and the bodies that had been festering there for years to finally be found. One question I still have is, was his wife ever aware of what he was up to? A Vanity Fair article on the case, which was particularly useful when I was researching for this video, simply stated, how much his wife knew was unclear, even years later. Apparently a spokesman for the family issued a written statement a few days after he was arrested, stating, quote, "We have never seen any behaviour that would have led us to believe that anything we are now hearing could be possible. While we do not discount the information that has and continues to come to light, we do not know the person whom we have read and heard about on TV. John Robinson is a loving and caring husband and father. We wait with each of you for the cloud of allegations and innuendo to clear, revealing, at last, the facts." That seems to imply that the family had no idea of John's crimes, but of course it's not like they're going to come out and admit they knew all along. His wife Nancy filed for divorce in 2005 after 41 years of marriage, citing incompatibility and irreconcilable differences. However, this was 5 years after John had been apprehended following the discovery of the dead bodies on his property. She actually testified on his behalf during the trial, and some sources imply she maintained a relationship with him for some time after his incarceration. I guess we can kinda give her a bit of leeway initially. If she really didn't suspect anything all those years, the shock could have caused her to be in denial for some time. But how can you be in denial for 5 whole years, even after he got convicted? I'm not at all suggesting Nancy was involved or knew exactly what John was doing, but it does make me wonder if she did at least suspect something and just turned a blind eye. I'm not sure why else she'd stick by him for so long after it all came out. There is some information online to suggest she was aware that he was into BDSM and that he used aliases with people he was in contact with, but that's about it. I honestly have no idea. There's next to no information online about her or any of his other family, so I don't want to speculate too much. All we do know is that John is an absolute monster who deserves all the suffering he inflicted on his victims and more. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any topics you might like me to cover in the future. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.